years ago now. In grad school, I thought I might teach instead of doing ministry. I did all the ministry-required things, but I was also part of a teacher training program at the same time. And I spent a semester, in my last year there, I spent a semester teaching 9th grade world history in the suburbs of Boston. And I still remember one parent stopping by unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I remember it because I remember my bafflement. His kid was particularly insightful, particularly unruly. Y'all know kids like, some of you were kids like that. So I told his dad, I said, your son is a bright kid, and you can see it when he participates in conversations in class. He's sharp, he has good questions, good comments, he challenges other students' ideas. Yeah, well, said his father, I think misunderstanding what I was saying. He thinks he's smart. Like when he watches the news with me, he's always asking me these questions, and I say, shut up, they'll tell you in a minute. But he thinks he's smarter than them. I don't remember even a little bit what I said in response to that, but I remember feeling so shocked because in class I was telling my students, ask lots of questions, investigate, challenge sources, talk with your peers. If you don't agree with them, that's the time to get curious first. And at home, apparently, it was shut up, they'll tell you in a minute. Which means your questions don't matter. Which means knowledge and understanding of the world belong to other people, and our job is to listen to what they say and learn from them how things are. In the aftermath of World War II, knowing how destructive that kind of thinking was, a group of philosophers and educators created a school of educational philosophy called critical pedagogy, how to teach critical thinking, critical engagement in the world, because without that awareness, education just reproduces the status quo. It keeps things exactly as they are. The town I taught in for my student teaching back then was almost completely white, and I was entirely unaware then that it wasn't an accident, that it wasn't just a random roll of the ethnic dice of who had ended up in that town. The same way Boulder's 90% white racial makeup is not an accident of random chance either. Critical pedagogy says our work is to keep on asking why. Why are things this way? What other ways could they be? And these critical pedagogy folks said, in order to ask those questions, you've got to teach people to think critically and act on what they learn. They said the theory, the description about how the world works, the common sense notions are not objective. The way we teach history is not objective. The way we teach economics is not objective. The way we teach sociology, not objective. The stamp of social norms on objective theory is everywhere, and it appears consistently, especially in this country, around questions of race. Whites in power in the United States consistently relied on scientific fact to justify discrimination, exclusion, systemic oppression of non-whites. It was, for example, objective market demands. I hope you hear the scare quotes around that. Objective market demands, not personal racism, that justified exclusionary housing policies in suburban America in the mid-20th century. Suburban residents explained that if blacks joined their neighborhoods, property values would go down. So it wasn't about race or racism, it was merely about objective economic theory. The same way we talk about homelessness here in Boulder, or about allowing multifamily dwellings and single-family neighborhoods. In those decades of the mid-20th century, segregation in housing wasn't about racism, hear my sarcasm. but as scientific necessity to carry out the will of the market. And exclusionary government lending practices, redlining, denying loans to people of color, those were justified merely as response to objective market demands. The legal scholar Cheryl Harris observes that in this country, the laws did not mandate that black people be accorded equality because nature, not man, not power, not violence, nature had determined their less than status. When we don't ask questions about why things are the way they are, and then keep on asking those questions relentlessly and critically, when we let other people explain to us that the unjust world is as it must be, then the status quo stays inevitable, stays right, stays unchanging. By contrast, the educator, the philosopher of education, Paulo Freire, writes that the goal of critical education is for students to develop their power to perceive critically the way they exist in the world with which and in which they find themselves. He says the work is to see the world not as static reality, but in process, in transformation. And education, then, just like preaching, is not about teaching students to wait for someone else to explain the world to them. It's about learning to see themselves and their relationships, to perceive the world and the way it is and the way it can be, all as changeable. We take the world maybe as fixed and ourselves powerless, but both of those things are wrong. Every aspect of the world is in process, and we are too. Making that stand requires that we first learn to recognize how these structural oppressions function, to tune our ears, to listen in for racist arguments which appear not to be. And only then can we become people working for liberation. That's what critical means. Engagement with the world as a critical thinker, always asking, why is the world as it is? And then consciously choosing whether to participate or not. That's what we do in this house, just like the classroom. The best piece of preaching feedback I ever received was from a 96-year-old who had joined the church I served then in 1947. He sat just right there, third row, right-hand side from my view every Sunday, suit and tie, one of the very few people in the building in a suit and tie. That man had style. He came to me after the service one Sunday and he said, "Reverend, this is very nice. I just wish you'd preach more things I don't already agree with." All right. He was hungry for the critical. A friend of mine, a black woman, was selling her condo in a multiracial neighborhood. When it came time to stage the house for photos for the listing, she went from room to room and took all of the African art off her walls. She went from room to room and packed up all the family photos, and then walked her home with a critical eye to remove every trace of her blackness from it. Why? Because a black-owned home sells for less than a white-owned home, even when it is the same home. And she wanted to get paid a white person rate for her condo. Critical race theory asks why? Why is that true? What are the forces at work here? What is the history at work here? In Longmont, where I live, the schools east of Main Street have a much higher proportion of Hispanic families. They're less well-resourced. They have worse educational outcomes than the schools west of Main Street, with a much higher proportion of whites. Critical race theory asks why? Why do the schools split this way in that town? What has happened in the 6 decades since the Klan made Longmont their state headquarters? What hasn't happened in those decades? Critical race theory looks at racism as a systemic problem, a problem of systems, not just active racists. We can pick that up in medicine. Black people are 30 times less likely to develop skin cancer than white people. I'm sorry, white people, to break this news to you. But here's the thing, the survival rates for white people who get skin cancer are way higher. The 5-year survival rate for a white person with skin cancer is 90%. The 5-year survival rate for a black person with skin cancer is 66%. In large part because it's caught much later. Critical race theory asks why? Why are dermatologists way worse at identifying skin conditions in people of color than white people? Why? Well, the training is mostly on white people. Why? Well, medical textbooks are mostly written by white people with examples of white systems. Why? Well, we didn't used to let black people be medical professionals. And our textbooks are still stamped with that. It's not a conspiracy of Caucasian dermatologists. It's not at all the case that some angry racist white person decided, how can we give black people more skin cancer? It's a systemic problem, a historical problem, a problem as invisible to many white doctors as the segregation in this city is to many of us. I read an analogy here that I felt like worked pretty well. Imagine that a guy who hates disabled people builds a hotel. So he bans anyone with mobility issues. He builds it in a way to specifically make access difficult. No handicap spots, no curb cuts, only stairs everywhere. Years later, he sells the hotel to a new owner who has no problem with folks with mobility problems. So you have a hotel now where the owner has no problem with folks who have disabilities, neither do any of the staff, but due to the actions of the previous owner, the hotel's still built in a way that doesn't accommodate them. The people running it are not actively discriminating, but they are running a system designed to discriminate. And they need to fix it even if they aren't to blame for it. Critical race theory is acknowledging and identifying the historic and systemic problems that made that hotel inaccessible. The way systemic injustice happens is that it doesn't require someone to actively maintain it. That's what's so elegantly awful about it. Not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, writes James Baldwin. We need to face the racism which pervades this nation, which prevents this nation from being who we are called to be. We need to face the ugliness of our history and the reality that it is stamped into the institutions of the present day, from house to hospital and schoolhouse to courthouse. I turned on the radio last week in time only to hear an interviewer pose the question with no context whatsoever: should we feel proud of our history in America, or do we need to reckon with it? But it's a false choice. The reality is we need to do both of those things. We need to save and lift up and celebrate the best of who we are and what we stand for. Why we are here as a nation is no less beautiful a vision or aspiration for the reality being that we've always fallen short of it. Should we feel proud, or should we reckon with the history and face its full ugliness? The answer is, of course, yes. Yes, we should. The first and the second. But hidden in that question is a fear, and you may feel this too, that facing history means feeling shame. If you live in a home which you could afford because of systemic racism, you sell your home for more because you're white, not black, you get skin cancer, you live. And therefore, what exactly? I think so often the reflexive response, the therefore in that sentence is, therefore you are bad. Bad, bad, bad. You've done bad things, you are part of the problem, and you should feel bad about yourself because you have this benefit. You should be ashamed of yourself. And that's a horrible feeling. It's an awful feeling. It's so much easier to avoid that feeling by minimizing and denying, switching to a different topic, moving to talk about race somewhere else than your hometown. But don't get caught by that shame trap. It is a trap. Because avoidance never decreases anxiety. Avoidance only ever increases anxiety. And switching subjects isn't a solution. We inherited a hotel we didn't build. And we don't need to get guilty because of the builders. We need to figure out how to make it accessible. Shame is a trap to keep you looking inside yourself instead of the world outside you. Shame keeps you looking at your private past instead of our shared future. Shame encourages you to tally your personal purity. Did you say everything exactly right, exactly all of? Don't fall for this stuff. Of course you're going to screw up, and of course you have in the past. That just means you're a person. The more conscious you get about race, the more you might discover that things are uncomfortable. But friends, the inherent worth and dignity we so strongly believe in is not just for other people, it's for you also. And that's a trust that you're not bad, that you're not broken, even if the systems you live in are. Shame is a trap to fall into. And our work is to spot it and just to politely say, no, thank you. I'm going to pass on that today. The work of critical race theory is to ask, why is the world the way it is today? Not to ask, what percentage of the world is my fault personally? It's a starting place, it's a process, it's a method for engaging with the world. And that's not just a philosophical or a civic task. The purpose of religion, says Rebecca Parker, a past president of one of our Unitarian seminaries, the purpose of religion is to allow us to unmask all the false faces of the world. The purpose of education is salvation. For us as Unitarian Universalists, our work for justice rises out of our spiritual commitments. And the inherent worth and dignity of every person affirmed in our principles is not an abstract fact. It makes demands on us. It demands that it flow through our social interactions, our economic decisions, our voting decisions. There's no part of our lives walled off and separate from our values, from our ethics. But also there's no part of our lives to which that inherent worth and dignity does not apply. This is not a principle for others. It's for you also. And the critical orientation that we bring to our faith life. Asking questions, investigating, challenging sources, talking with your peers if you don't agree with something they say, starting in curiosity. That's just the same commitment that critical race theory asks us to do in our civic life outside these walls. We begin to make our future by facing our past. There's a prayer attributed to the Archbishop Oscar Romero, and I close with these words. It helps now and then to step back and take a long view. No statement says all that can be said. No prayer fully expresses everything. No confession, he was Catholic, no confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we're about. We plant seeds that will one day grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We can't do everything, and there's a sense of liberation in realizing that. It enables us to do something, and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it's a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end result, but we are prophets of a future not our own. Will you rise in body or in spirit? Let's sing it together.